welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very special show coming right up with Reverend Carol-Howard-Merritt, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Healing Spiritual Wounds. Now, Reverend Carol is an award-winning author, speaker, and minister who speaks and writes on the topic of ministering to a new generation. Her books include Tribal Church, Ministering to the Missing Generation, and Reframing Hope, Vital Ministry in a New Generation. She writes for the Christian Century, the Huffington Post, Duke's Divinity Faith, and Leadership Blog. So let's welcome to the show Reverend Carol.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be talking with you.
Oh, what a pleasure it is to have you here. And my goodness, your book is so profound. I really enjoyed reading it.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. Well, and so I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book? Because I'd love for you to share your personal journey with us.
You know, I was walking with a friend who was not a part of a church, not a part of any sort of religious community, and she was asking me why I had become a minister, and it was just interesting to be asked that question from her because I've been asked it many, many times along my journey. But typically it's from people who are attending church or thinking about hiring me or thinking about working with me in one way or another. So I felt this sort of new freedom to be able to answer her honestly. And I immediately went to this point of time in my life. And my parents were fighting, and I was very young. And I remember knowing that a lot of my church taught that women should submit to men and that men should, I was in a very conservative Christian church. And you know, a lot of the marital tension that was happening came from that idea that women should submit to men. And it was really frustrating for my husband, for my father when he wasn't able to be 100% in charge. I remember as a small child listening to my parents fight and going back and forth in my bedroom trying to figure out a plan of escape. And then at some point I began to plead just to the universe, and eventually it became this prayer. And I sat down on my bed and I began to breathe deeply, and I felt this peace, and it was almost this palpable cerulean blue sort of feeling that overcame me. It was like an epidural, you know. It was just so palpable. And I remembered that day, and as I look back, you know, decades later and think about that day, I realized two things were happening there. One was that religion was hurting me. It was hurting our family. It was, I don't know that it was the cause of the violence in our family, but it was definitely an excuse in our family. And it was also healing me in some sort of sense. So at that moment, as I think about my small child self in that bedroom, I realized that religion was hurting me, that it was part of the problem, the abuse and the violence that was happening in our home. Whether it was the cause or whether it was the excuse, I'm not sure, but there was some sort of relationship between religion and the violence in our home. But it was also healing me. And as I sat down on the bed, as I opened myself up, as I began to breathe deeply and to sense God surrounding me, or, you know, the divine or a spirit surrounding me, I realized that there were practices that were incredibly important to me as a human and me as a child, finding resilience in this moment.
Well, and so when you talk about spiritual wounds, what do you mean by that so our listeners can have a better idea of what that would look like for them?
Usually they center around a couple of things. Usually it's people who have some sense of God or the divine that's unhealthy. So people grow up with this idea that God formed them from clay, that God blew upon them, that God created them, and yet God was going to destroy them and not just destroy them and their souls would be annihilated, but there is a teaching out there that God would allow them to burn in eternal fire, so kind of eternal torture forever. And some people grow up thinking that any sort of misstep that they might have in their life, that they might do in their life, would cause God to react in this angry and vengeful way. So oftentimes, that's just a really hard way to go through life, thinking that any sort of misstep would create eternal torture. So people's ideas of God can be very wounding to our spirits, our souls, our well-being. Also, the ways in which people think about themselves. Many people were taught during the purity movement. There was a big religious movement in our country, particularly with conservative evangelicals who were taught that if they engaged in any sort of sexual misconduct or sexual acts at all, that they would, or even, sex before marriage, that they would be somehow damaged in some profound sense. And so people kind of grow up with this real grief and shame around their bodies and their sexuality, or they feel like if their sexual orientation is not heterosexual, then they grow up this incredibly difficult shame that they're carrying around in their physical bodies. Some people have even been told that as women, there's something wrong with them in some innate way. So often people aren't able to love themselves in ways that are healthy because they're carrying around this religious shame, or they're carrying around the condemnation that people have been heaping upon them. Or it might be just that they're not able to love their neighbors in healthy ways. We see a lot going on right now in our political situation that doesn't seem loving to the neighbors, but to our neighbors, but it's being done oftentimes in the name of God, and so that can be extremely harmful and hurtful for people.
I'm so glad that you gave us a reference point for that so people can have an understanding of what that means for them. Because I think a lot of times people do carry these wounds with them through life and feel kind of like shame for not being able to live up to a certain standard.
Yes, absolutely. And many times we don't even believe these things anymore. We might be taught something in church as we were growing up, or taught something in a religious community as we were growing up, but we don't even believe it anymore. But somehow our bodies carrying around this shame and this sense of judgment. And so people have had to unearth that in themselves.
Yeah, kind of see what that is for them. Well, and so what is the first step in being able to find some sort of healing, when you have these spiritual wounds?
Well, the main step, what we're trying to do, kind of the end goal, is that you're trying to find some wholeness in who you were and what you had gone through, and also who you are now. And oftentimes when people have been hurt by religion, they have a hard time separating God or separating spirit from the thing that wounded them. So, for instance, I was working with a man who had been the victim of a pedophile priest, and he had such a difficult time because he was trying to go through AA, and he was trying to wrestle with this idea of a higher power. But every time he thought about God, all he could think about was that man who abused him. And so he had to go through a process of imagining God as love. And when he was able to imagine God as love, then he was able to go forward. And so he didn't use the term God anymore. He didn't think in the terms of church anymore, but he was able to connect with love. And so he was able to go through the steps of healing through AA, and he was able to kind of make that connection with God. So many times, to untangle our relationship with the abuse and God, oftentimes that means we need to think of a new name for God, or a new metaphor for God, or a new way of relating to God.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, because you could see where maybe someone's had a bad experience at a church that they were very heavily involved in. Like you're mentioning, it's either some type of abuse or sexual abuse, what have you, and then trying to get to a place where you are able to connect with God can seem like a really daunting task.
Absolutely, yeah. So that is a lot of what the book is about. It's not, it's not trying to convert anyone, or it's not trying to, bang people over the head with God. But for those of us, and there are so many of us, who still have this spiritual longing, this yearning to connect with something larger than ourselves. For those of us who are profoundly moved by a sunset, or profoundly moved by the great mysteries of life that we know that we can't quite understand, this hopefully is a guide and a tool and a chance for people to connect to that greater mystery, even when we've been hurt or wounded in the past.
I think that's very encouraging for people, because they don't feel like they'll never be able to get to a place where they can, connect with the universe, God, their higher self, whatever it is that they like to call that.
Right.
Well, and so what are some of the, and we're not going to go to everything, because we do want people to pick up their own copy of Healing Spiritual Wounds, but what are like one or two of the tips or tools that people can use in healing their image of God?
Well, we are people who kind of cut off, I think, in our culture, because so many of us have to move away from our families or from where we grew up in because of education or jobs. And so we tend to be moving, nomadic sort of people. We have a big country here, and so a lot of us tend to move from one state or another. And so a lot of us go into our religious experiences in the same way. There will be people who will attend a church, and then, something that the pastor does or says irritates them, so they leave, very quickly. They just kind of leave. Or there is this issue with abuse, spiritual or religious abuse, and people, I think, have this tendency to just think that they can just leave one church and go to another. But the problem, or, leave the church altogether. But oftentimes the problem that I see when I'm working with people is that they stay connected with the congregation. They're not able to cut off or from their faith. And oftentimes, if they've been abused and they haven't been able to attend to that healing, they stay connected with their bitterness or their frustrations or their unforgiveness. And so they have all this negativity towards their religion, which oftentimes is very, very much warranted. And I don't want to undercut the fact that, many times it's very warranted. But if we're not able to completely cut off, the world just doesn't always work that way. We have to be able to heal, especially when we're talking about religion, when we're completely impassioned by religion, when we're completely committed to this community. There's a deep and emotional connection there. So part of what we try to do is to understand the part of ourselves that was part of that community and begin to hold that child or that teenager or that younger self on your lap and begin to understand why they believed the things that they do and have compassion on themselves. Because many times if we're not able to have compassion on ourselves, on our younger selves, on who we were, we're not able to go through life with compassion for one another. And so these religious wounds can cause a great irritation if we just try to cut it off and forget about it. Yet, if we're able to have compassion on who we were, on maybe why we believed the things that we believed, it helps to open this greater sense of healing.
Do you feel that when people go through this, they encounter a lot of shame?
Absolutely. It's interesting because many times there's shame. I explained the purity movement. There's shame around sexuality. Sometimes there's shame around, I've actually been contacted by soldiers who really thought of God and country as the same thing. And when they have gone overseas or when they've been caught in a really difficult situation, they tend to have this sense of moral injury. And so they realize that maybe the war that they were fighting wasn't completely just, or they have done something in the light of duty that they didn't agree with morally, or they've been a part of an act that was very shameful. So it's interesting because people will not only feel shame about what they've done or what happened in their religious when they were growing up, but they also can feel shame for their own naivety. And so it kind of comes at you in different ways, in different sources. So one of the important things that we've learned about shame over the years is that, there's a difference between guilt and shame. Shame is something that kind of attacks who you are, and guilt is something that deals with what you do. And so understanding that what you do is not necessarily who you are is really helpful in these situations.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Reverend Carol Carol-Howard-Merritt in regards to her new book, Healing Spiritual Wounds. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We've been speaking with Reverend Carol-Howard-Merritt in regards to her new book, Healing Spiritual Wounds, Connecting with a Loving God After Experiencing a Hurtful Church. Now, Reverend Carol, one of the things that we were talking about before we went to break is in regards to how you are being contacted by our veterans that may feel conflicted and that there's hope for them as there is for everybody. There's a light at the end of the tunnel when we talk about healing our spiritual wounds. I'd love for you to expand on that and tell us a little bit more about your thoughts in regards to that.
Absolutely. I think so. And many of them will have to, work through this idea of God and country or work through some of the moral injury that's occurred and begin to this process of healing. And it's been beautiful to watch people come through it on the other side. We have so many soldiers who have been wounded spiritually and psychologically, and there's not a lot of places in our culture where they can go and talk about these things.
At least gives them a place where they feel like they have a sense of community. And is that part, of one of the reasons that people are able to overcome shame to begin with?
Having a sense of community, that definitely helps with being able to overcome shame. Just being surrounded by people who are able to understand you as a person of worth, as a person who is loved and beloved and who loves. All of those things are extremely important. There are many ways in which people can learn disciplines that they can have and form in community, oftentimes singing or meditating or praying, these things, when they're done in community, they not only rewire our brains because, meditation and being able to pray and being able to sing helps us rewire our brains, but they also help us because we resonate with the people surrounding us. And so if we can find a peaceful community, a community that's committed to being good people, the best people that we can be, that helps us in so many different ways, and certainly helps that sense of shame.
Yeah, being able to move beyond that. And it's interesting, and the reason we're kind of touching on shame so much, because I think a lot of people, and obviously your book covers this, they kind of go through that when kind of just delving into, what does my spirituality mean for me, and what does God look like for me?
Right. So many people grew up with spirituality just being this thing where it was a rule book and all of these things they could do and couldn't do, mostly things that they could not do. And so people kind of grow up feeling this in their hearts, and they carry around these rules in their bellies, and each time they slip up, they feel that judgment and that shame. But of course, in my tradition, I'm a Christian, and Jesus talks about, I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Well, he didn't say, I came so that you can have a ton of rules and say, behave appropriately. It was more that we could find pleasure and joy and the sense of abundance in the world. And I think that is what we are to be. When we learn to love ourselves and love each other and love God, it should bring us to the sense of abundance. But too often, religion has been used as, moral, not even moral in a greater sense, but this sense of morality that, is just supposed to control you so you don't drink or have sex or do drugs or whatever might be in your rule book that you grew up with.
Yeah. Well, and so it's interesting when we look at spiritual wounds, and you've covered a lot of your own experience to begin with. What were one of the most difficult ones that you had to encounter?
For myself, it was a sense of feeling like I wanted to be a minister, and I was in a church that didn't believe in women being ordained. So I had this calling, this really, really strong sense and, a vocation of who I wanted to be in life. And there were all of these people surrounding me telling me that I couldn't because I was a woman. And it was just so painful. Like I felt it in my bones, and I still kind of carry that around, that, it wasn't because of anything, even because of who I was. It was just happened to be because of the body parts I was carrying around at the time. And it just felt so profoundly unfair. I eventually left that tradition and went to a tradition that celebrated the gifts of women, and so I became ordained. But it just wasn't an easy process. It was a very difficult process, and I had to unearth a lot of the misogyny that I was carrying around, that I internalized, and misogyny that people were throwing at me. And I had to do that difficult and careful work of staying connected with family, even though they disapproved of my profession.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when we start walking our own path and living our truth, eventually we have people that end up resonating with us on a pretty broad spectrum.
Absolutely. And I found that in my congregations, in my writing and speaking, is that it's like you strike a chord and there are other people who have, those complementary notes. They're also able to sing along with you at the same tune. And whether that is a song of lament and worry and fear, or whether it's a song of hope and joy, it just seems like there is this incredible chord that we begin to sing on. It's kind of like the Me Too movement, when people were able to say, yes, this happened to me. There were other people that said, yes, this happened to me too. And that sense of solidarity, that bond, helped so many people around the country and even the world be able to claim these stories that they weren't able to claim, but also to find some solidarity and some hope and healing in that.
And what a big difference that makes, It's like when you become part of a community for something that you're suffering through, it makes it seem like it's so much easier to overcome that.
Right. We're not alone. We're able to bear each other's hardships in a profound sense. And that's what community is. When they're being the best, that's what we do.
It's like supporting one another. Well, and you were pretty personal in your book, Healing Spiritual Wounds, and you even talked about having an eating disorder. I would love for you to expand on that for our listeners and just talk about your experience of that. Because I think a lot of people have, when you talk about body image, quite often if we don't talk about it, it's actually kind of something that's being set our way with images. We're just kind of being bombarded with it. And I think it's important to have discussions in regards to that.
Yeah, I grew up in Florida on a beach community, and so sort of the ideal body was very, very thin, and so then I was sort of growing up with this sort of inward shame and hatred towards my body, and this sense of martyrdom, that I needed to be a martyr. And all of that coalesced so that I began to, at a very young age, start the list of I can eat this, I can't eat that, I cannot eat that. And it wasn't necessarily based on, being healthy. It was based solely on calories or fat content. And so I quickly began doing that. And then when I would eat, I would really hurt myself. So I would start, I remember my 16th birthday, I had a piece of cake, and I wasn't thin at all, but I had this, whatever, I was normal sized, but I had this piece of birthday cake on my birthday, and I felt so overwhelmingly guilty about it that I started running, and I ran around the neighborhood and ran around. And it was I was having a party, like there was a party going on at my house, and I put on my running shoes and started running during my party. I don't think anybody missed me, which was good. But I look back and I think about, that poor girl who couldn't appreciate and enjoy a slice of cake for her birthday without feeling that overwhelming guilt and shame and need to discipline myself after that. So, yeah, I was kind of bombarded with these body images, and I didn't really know what to do with it. I knew that my body didn't match that body, that ideal body out there, and so I was constantly really hurting myself in pretty distinct ways. And I think a lot of that comes back to that inability to realize that, taste and food and life is here for us to enjoy. It's not here for us to, good food doesn't exist so that I can keep myself from it, so that I can't eat it. But somehow I had grown with that ideal. And I really want to, think about this more and talk about it more as, my writing continues, because I think it's something we all grow up with, and or not everybody, but a lot of us grow up with, especially women and more men. How do we do that? How do we deal with it?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because when we look at just these different things that plague us, one of the things I was real impressed about you is that you never walked away from your faith. You kind of kept that, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like you kind of kept that as a center point for you. You were just redefining what it meant for you.
Yeah, that was just really important for me. There were some dark nights of the soul. There were some times when I thought, how can I stick with this? How can I do this? But I do think those kind of profound experiences that I had when I was younger just sort of grounded me and kept me thinking. And, even now, it's not as if I have to stay in religion or I have to stay faithful. I feel like, I want to be open to whatever happens, but I've always stayed grounded in this profound mystery that surrounds us all, right? There is this incredible beauty. I just want my life to be open to the mysterious and the beautiful. And I hope that no amount of ugliness will make me leave. But I'm always sorting through, what is faith and what is love and what is truth, and trying to find ways to get to that, even in spite of all the ways that we can use religion to start wars or to abuse people or to shut people up or to oppress people. Being able to keep that connection with God, even though religion's been used as a tool in so many difficult ways.
And, it's interesting, you point this out kind of in your book, in kind of a roundabout way, is that, while we do those things to other people, we also do it to ourselves.
Right. Yeah. There are so many ways in which we kind of internalize these difficult messages and these hateful messages. And sometimes we don't even know that we're doing it. And, I'll sit down with people and we'll begin to kind of sort out these messages that have happened. So one of the exercises that I talk about in the book is just writing down, I am God's beloved child in whom God is well pleased. And just writing that out, 25 times. And then every time you hear a message in your mind that doesn't allow you to believe that or to write that, you have to write that, negative message down as well. And I've done this exercise with a number of people in a number of places. And it's amazing to me how many people can't get to that place where they can say, I am God's beloved child. God is well pleased with me. And it's because they've internalized so many of these negative messages of, oh, well, God can't be pleased with me. I'm gay, or God can't be pleased with me. I did something wrong, or God can't be pleased with me. I had sex before I was married, or, we carry these things and we're just, and they're incredibly damaging to us. But somehow if we're able to identify them, that helps us to get over the shame. So typically what I have people do is when they write these negative messages, if they can figure out the origin of the message, figure out where it came from, sort of place themselves back into that situation, and then begin to either reparent themselves or have a new understanding for themselves, or even imagine God loving that child who is hurt or that person who is hurt. It just helps in that healing process.
Well, I think that's just beautiful advice, because when we are in a place where we're so wounded and also disconnected, at least we're feeling like we're disconnected from God or the universe, it makes it really hard for people to move forward many times.
Absolutely. And, there are times when people have gotten divorced, or people have been in places where they just feel like God can't love them again. But God does love you, and it doesn't matter what, how you perform or what you do. God does love you and surrounds you and holds you and embraces you.
Well, it's just powerful message to end on. Well, and so Carol, where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
I am on Twitter at Carol Howard. I'm also on Facebook. So I post there every once in a while, but mainly on Twitter. I have a website, carol-howard-merritt.org, and so I, post where I'm going to be and what I'm going to be doing. So I'm usually pretty out there as far as I blog for the Christian Century, but we'll probably have another website coming up. So I'll announce it when it happens, but keep your ears open. So Twitter's probably the best place where I'm most active.
Well, and I know your book, Healing Spiritual Wounds, is available at all major bookstores, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And so, Carol, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about connecting with all of you.
Well, thank you, Reverend Carol. It's been such a joy to spend this time with you, and of course, to talk about your new book, Healing Spiritual Wounds, Reconnecting with a Loving God After Experiencing a Hurtful Church. And one more time, you can get this book. It's available at all major retailers, Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If you walk into your local bookstore and they don't have it, you can ask for them to order it for you. It's available everywhere. If you'd like to also connect with Reverend Carol, you can at her website at carol-howard-merritt.org. Make sure to drop her an email if you have any questions in regards to the book, and stay in touch with her and be part of her community. If you have a book suggestion that you would like the show to review, please email us at marianne@mariannepastana.com. You can also visit the Moments with Marianne website at momentswithmarianne.com, and also has listed the book club, which has lots of great books. You can check out what's available for this month and the past months. The book list has many bestsellers, and you can also view what upcoming shows are going to be happening for the rest of the month. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.